Hello and welcome to WION Live broadcast. I'm Alison Lagrange from Durban, and these are the top stories of the hour. A major UK poll has put the Labour Party 8 points ahead of the Conservatives as Boris Johnson faces backlash over sleaze crisis. The shock poll also suggests that Johnson would lose his parliamentary constituency in Greater London. The 10 most expensive weather disasters this year linked to climate change caused more than $170 billion in damage and brought misery to millions around the world, according to a new report. India's Omicron tally surges to 578, with capital New Delhi topping the list at 142 cases. Several states have imposed a night curfew and a ban on New Year gatherings in view of the growing infections. South Africa begins a week of mourning after the demise of anti-apartheid icon Archbishop Desmond Tutu, as tributes pour in from across the world for the outspoken Nobel Peace Laureate. The hit new Spider-Man becomes the first billion-dollar grossing film of the pandemic era at the global box office, also taking the title of highest grossing film of 2021.
You botched that spell where you wanted everyone.
And Australia have one hand on the Ashes urn after England's batters crumble in the second innings of the Melbourne Test. The collapse has undone all the hard work from the bowlers, who had scraped through the day and restricted the first innings lead to just 82.
Wow, 4 for 22, as you call.
Hello and welcome. Let's take a look at our top story. The Prime Minister of the United Kingdom has been hit by a deluge. A new COVID variant, a rebellious Conservative Party, cascading questions about secret parties, and collapsing poll ratings. This has become a good news for the opposition party. Now, according to a poll commissioned by the Sunday Times, the Labour Party in the UK has taken an 8-point lead over the Tories. This means if the UK goes to polls now, Keir Starmer would win the general election with the majority of 26 seats. This survey was taken over a 3-week period from the 1st of December and saw a participation of almost 25,000 people across all constituencies. But there's no election lined up for at least 2 years, so there's no immediate threat to Boris Johnson from the voters. But if the Conservative lawmakers decide that Johnson's recent unpopularity is jeopardizing their political futures, then they can choose to eject Johnson through an internal leadership vote or a vote of no confidence. And for the first time, the political analysts and party members believe that such a challenge is plausible. The Prime Minister has been hit with a sheer number of problems threatening his hold on power. The virus restrictions he announced went through a difficult vote in Parliament. There is a swirl of questions on Johnson's staff partying during Christmas last year. Then the Prime Minister himself was pictured attending another get-together at Downing Street, which adds to the perception of double standards and incompetence. The holiday party affair is under investigation and findings will be revealed later this week. But the rapidly spreading Omicron variant could help Boris Johnson politically. Now, he is using the fresh public health crisis around which to mobilize another national vaccination campaign. And Johnson's urgent call for booster shots has resonated with the public. People have booked more than 100,000 appointments by Monday morning, causing the National Health Service's website to crash under the weight of the demand. Long lines have formed outside vaccination sites. Britain's rate of fully vaccinated people now trails those of France, Italy, and Portugal. Amid escalating tensions between Russia and Ukraine, Russia says it has received a NATO proposal to commence talks on Moscow's security concerns. The Kremlin is seriously considering the NATO proposal. NATO chief Jens Stoltenberg has sought a meeting with Russia and has contacted Moscow to secure its attendance. According to reports, the talks will begin on the 12th of January. Russia has chalked down a list of security proposals it wants to negotiate with NATO. This also includes a promise from NATO to give up any military activity in Ukraine and the entire Eastern European region. In his latest warning, Putin made it clear that his country will be ready with alternatives if the West fails to meet his push for security guarantees on Ukraine. Meanwhile, U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris has threatened Russia with sanctions if it dares to invade Ukraine. During an interview with CBS, Harris said that the U.S. is working with its allies in this regard and is preparing to slap sanctions if Russia does not step back. Now, earlier this month, Russia submitted a proposal draft demanding that NATO deny membership to Ukraine and other former Soviet countries. Launching a fresh attack against Ukraine, Putin recently said that it is impossible to have good relations with the current Ukrainian government, and that President Volodymyr Zelensky has come under the influence of radical forces.
Проблема для нас. Мы-то хотим выстроить добрососедские отношения с Украиной. Причем, что называется, любой ценой. Идем на все практически. Но как можно выстроить отношения с сегодняшним руководством? С учетом того, что они делают? Ну, практически невозможно. Но мы готовы работать с теми силами, которые хотели бы выстроить отношения с Россией.
NATO has repeatedly decried Russia's 2014 annexation of Crimea from Ukraine. Now, Russia's recent troop build-up near the Ukrainian border has once again sparked fears of a possible Russian invasion in the region. Moscow, however, has denied the claims and, in turn, has accused Ukraine of hatching plans to try to reclaim control of the territories held by Moscow-backed rebels.
Характере действий противника. У бойца у него ранение в плечо. И начинаю эвакуацию. Да.
Meanwhile, over 10,000 Russian troops are heading home after finishing months-long military drills near the Ukrainian border. This comes as Russia awaits security talks with the US and NATO amid mounting tensions with Ukraine. Here are the details.
After Russian troops took part in month-long drills in several regions near Ukraine, more than 10,000 soldiers are returning to their permanent bases. That's according to Interfax news agency on Saturday, citing the Russian military, which described the drills as a stage of combat coordination now completed. Russia's deployment of tens of thousands of troops to the north, east, and south of Ukraine had fueled fears in Kiev and the West that Moscow was planning an attack. Some drills took place in Crimea, which Russia annexed in 2014. There have been a flurry of phone calls between Western leaders and Russian President Vladimir Putin in recent months over Russia's military buildup on the Ukrainian border. But Putin has denied any plans for an invasion. He says Russia needs commitment from Western nations, including a promise from NATO not to expand the alliance eastward toward Russian borders because its own security is threatened by Ukraine's growing ties with the Western alliance. Moscow also says it can deploy its troops on its own territory as it sees fit. One U.S. intelligence report suggested there could be up to 175,000 troops that recently moved closer to Ukraine.
South Africa has declared a week-long mourning period for the death of anti-apartheid icon Desmond Tutu. He was widely regarded as the country's moral compass for his struggle against the oppressive white minority rule. Tutu won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1984. Archbishop Desmond Tutu will be laid to rest on the first day of the new year at his former parish. Desmond Tutu's foundation announced that arrangements for the mourning are still in their early stages. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa acknowledged the mark that Tutu left on the lives of millions of people.
We have lost a person who carried the burden of leadership with compassion, with dignity, with humility, and with such good humor. We are comforted in the knowledge that he has left an indelible mark in the lives of millions of people who had the privilege and honor of knowing him. Like many of his time, he was a witness to the gravest injustices and most intolerable cruelty that our country has ever witnessed.
Tutu was considered as the driving force behind the movement to end the policy of racial segregation, which was enforced in South Africa from 1948 until 1991.
So yeah, all I can say is that it's very sad. You know, we lost a legend. You know, we've been losing legends. It was Mandela up there. Now it's the bishop. So yeah, it's very sad. It's very sad.
In 2013, he disowned the African National Congress Party due to alleged bad governance. Soon after launching a scathing attack on the party, which he had earlier elected his friend Nelson Mandela as president, breaking tradition, in the same year, the Archbishop also declared support for gay rights, saying he would never worship a homophobe god.
I can say he was the last man standing. And now, now that he's gone, I don't know, because the people like him, with his beliefs, they are no longer there. So he was, like I said, he really was the last man standing.
Tributes from across the world poured in for Tutu soon after his death. Cape Town City Hall was coloured in purple as a tribute to Tutu.
Archbishop Tutu was many things to many people. He was a pastor, he was a spiritual leader, he was an activist, a healer. He also opposed racial discrimination and equally all other forms of discrimination and injustice.
UN Chief Antonio Guterres said he was an inspiration to everyone around the world, adding that people will continue to draw strength from him to fight for a better world. The White House issued a statement on the Archbishop's demise, saying that his legacy transcends borders and will echo throughout the ages. Former President Barack Obama also joined the mourning, saying Desmond Tutu was a moral compass of the country. Meanwhile, Queen Elizabeth paid tribute by recalling her meetings with Desmond Tutu. She said the Archbishop's loss will be felt widely and remembered his warmth and humour. UK's Prime Minister Boris Johnson paid tributes and said that he was deeply saddened to hear of the death of Archbishop. He said Desmond Tutu was a critical figure in the fight against apartheid and in the struggle to create a new South Africa. French President Emmanuel Macron remembered Desmond Tutu for leading a life dedicated to human rights and equality, saying his role in the anti-apartheid movement will remain a long-lasting memory. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi said Tutu was a guiding light for countless people globally, adding that his emphasis on human dignity will be remembered. Moving on now, Israel has approved an over $300 million plan to double the Jewish settler population in the Golan Heights. The multi-million-dollar project plans were announced by Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett. The move is meant to further consolidate Israel's hold on the territory it captured from Syria more than 5 decades ago. Under the plan, Israel aims to build 7,300 settler homes in the region over a 5-year period. 2 new Golan settlements are also planned, and 4,000 homes would be built there. The announcement comes 40 years after Israel occupied the territory. Millions of dollars will be spent on housing, infrastructure, and other projects. The goal is to attract roughly 23,000 new Jewish settlers to the area. Around 25,000 Israeli settlers live in Golan Heights, along with about 23,000 Jews.
המטרה שלנו היום היא להכפיל את ההתיישבות ברמת הגולן. לשם כך אנחנו מחזקים את העיר קצרין בשתי שכונות חדשות, רובע 12, רובע 13. לשם כך אנחנו גם מקימים 2 יישובים חדשים ברמת הגולן, היישוב אסיף והיישוב מטר. אנחנו מגבירים פה את ההתיישבות.
Israel occupied the Golan Heights from Syria in the 1967 Middle East War. Israel annexed the territory on the 14th of December 1981, but the move was not recognized by most of the international community. The U.S. was the first country to recognize Israel's sovereignty over the Golan. U.S. recognition was granted by former U.S. President Donald Trump in 2019. Bennett claimed that after a decade of conflict in Syria, international calls to restore Syrian control were muted. Israel and Syria, which are still technically at war, are separated by a de facto border at the Golan Heights. The region also overlooks Lebanon and borders Jordan. Now, Israel has long argued that the strategically important area has been fully integrated into Israel since it was captured. Israel also emphasizes that control of the strategic plateau is needed as protection from Iran and its allies in Syria. But Syria demands the return of the strategic plateau. Shifting our focus to Libya, where the bodies of at least 28 Europe-bound migrants have washed up on the country's western coast after their boat capsized at sea. This is the latest maritime tragedy to unfold in one of the world's deadliest migration routes. The bodies were found late on Saturday in 2 separate locations in the coastal town of Khoms, some 90 kilometers from the capital city of Tripoli. The actual date of the shipwreck is, however, not known.
يوم السبت مساء كان في اتصال من منظمة WION منظمة الهجرة الدولية وفي بلاغ من مركز شرطة كسر خيار بوجود 14 جثة على شاطئ البحر. طبعا تم التواصل معهم وشفنا تم الكشف على الجثث. كانت جثث هي لها تقريبا يوم ملقاة في البحر.
Libya, ravaged by a decade of conflict and civil unrest, has become a key departure point for African migrants making desperate attempts to reach Europe. Migrants often endure horrific conditions in Libya before embarking northwards on overcrowded vessels that frequently sink. The latest tragedy comes just days after 160 migrants died in a similar accident. According to the International Organization for Migration, over 1,500 migrants have lost their lives this year alone, while some 30,000 migrants have been intercepted and brought back to Libya. The city of Los Angeles is all set to host the annual Rose Parade on New Year's Day. This iconic New Year's Day traditional parade, also known as the Tournament of Roses, which marks the beginning of Rose Bowl game held in Pasadena, California. Now, the early morning parade includes massive flower-covered floats, marching bands, and equestrian units. Let's take a look at the preparations. It was indeed a Merry Christmas for English actor Tom Holland and the American media franchise Marvel Cinematic Universe. Their latest release, Spider-Man No Way Home, became the first pandemic-era movie to cross the $1 billion mark at the global box office. The movie, which stars Tom Holland as Peter Parker, aka Spider-Man, officially grossed over $1 billion worldwide after sustaining several delays during its making due to the COVID-19 pandemic. The film was finally released in the US on the 17th of December, and it was the final offering from Marvel Studios in 2021. No Way Home also took the title of highest-grossing film of this year. It defeated the Chinese-made Korean war epic, The Battle of Lake Changjin, which grossed more than $905 million in 2021. The last movie to gross more than $1 billion was 2019's Star Wars: The Rise of Skywalker. No other Hollywood production has come near that box office milestone since the coronavirus pandemic began 2 years ago. Now, the John Watts-directed film crossed the coveted mark in less than 2 weeks of its premiere. It has managed to break records even as the Omicron variant of COVID-19 is raising fresh concerns about outdoor activities. In 2019, Spider-Man Far From Home became the first Spider-Man film to cross the $1 billion mark at the box office and is currently the highest-grossing movie in the franchise with $1.132 billion in global ticket sales. In all likelihood, No Way Home could shatter that record, especially since it has so far not been released in China, which is currently the world's biggest cinema market. The success of No Way Home is quite interesting. The producers managed to assemble the Spidey trio, Tom Holland, Andrew Garfield, and Tobey Maguire, to fight off an ensemble of villains from their respective Spider-Man franchises. For the web-slingers fans, the year is sure to end on a high note. While a large part of the world is done with Christmas celebrations on the 25th of December, Russia and several other countries are yet to mark their Christmas. For these Orthodox Christians following the Julian calendar, Christmas comes a week after the New Year's Eve, on the 7th of January. Moscow has begun its preparations for the New Year's and Christmas celebrations. We leave you with this story.
The center of Moscow is dazzling with thousands of lights, installations, trees, garlands, and sparkling tunnels, as the city prepares to welcome the New Year and celebrate Christmas. Not all countries are done with Christmas celebrations on the 25th of December. In fact, there are large communities of Christians across the world who don't observe Christmas on December 25th. There are Christians who celebrate their Christmas a few weeks later. Russia's Orthodox Christians follow the Julian calendar and not the Gregorian calendar, which is commonly used in Western countries. However, parts of the former Soviet bloc in Middle East still use the Julian calendar. And there is a 13-day gap between the two calendars. So Orthodox Christians across the world will celebrate Christmas on the 7th of January. The celebrations will officially begin at midnight on the Christmas Eve. And Russia is home to more than a third of the world's Christians, which makes up for 39% of the population. Last year, the celebrations were partially cancelled due to the COVID-19 restrictions. However, this year, the traditional winter festival called Journey to Christmas has returned to Moscow. It's spread across 27 different locations, including the Red Square. Apart from Russia, several other countries celebrate Christmas in January, like Ukraine, Israel, Egypt, Bulgaria, Serbia, Belarus, Montenegro, Kazakhstan, Macedonia, Ethiopia, Eritrea, Georgia and Moldova. Some Orthodox countries such as Greece, Cyprus and Romania now use 25th December as Christmas. However, they will still hold celebrations according to their old Julian calendar. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
This is right, Arab.